You're listening to Montreal Now with Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall on CJAD 800.
That is James Mennie. He is over at the Montreal Gazette. And Jim, I have no idea what this story is about, so let's start there. You mentioned the president of the National Bank today talking to the Board of Trade. Usually a pretty boring affair, I would guess. What happened?
Well, and that's why I'm bringing it up, because La Presse obviously staffed the speech, and they wrote not one but two stories on it, because it's not every day that a bank president addresses, the Board of Trade and pretty much says what I think a lot of us are thinking. First of all, his name is Laurent Ferreira, and he pointed out that it's really swell that governments are throwing billions of dollars at companies for to promote the battery industry. These are all foreign companies. Says what you have to understand is that your taxpayer dollars are being used to fill the wallets of foreign shareholders, and that's not a very good idea. And I find it hard to believe that we don't have the expertise or the wherewithal in this country that we're not promoting Canadian companies, which I thought was, kind of interesting, because as you say, normally when you have the president of a bank give this kind of a speech, economic headwinds, we must stay the course. But the guy was just warming up. He also points out that yes, he's in favor of the promotion of French and Bill 96 in and of itself is not an evil thing, but there are parts of it, the way it's being applied, that the government is unnecessarily complicating the lives of businesses in Quebec that need all the help that they can get. And it's interesting, he pointed out that with the current provisions, whereas they should be promoting development of businesses in Quebec, they're keeping away, they're sort of pushing away talent and potential investment by all the complications. And you could say, well, gee, that's a pretty big deal. And, I would be expecting, I thought today for sure there'd be a movement in the National Assembly to vote, to vote their condemnation of this guy. But the other thing was they took the head economist for Banque Nationale, who also was a part of this presentation, who pointed out that, yeah, it's great to talk about inflation. The problem is we're letting too many damn people into this country. We have the capacity, according to his figures, and his name is Stéphane Marion, according to his figures, we have the capacity to welcome 300 to 500,000 people a year in Canada. Instead, in the past 2 years, we've brought in more than 1 million each year, which of course is going to make itself felt. So if there's a housing shortage, which is sort of feeds the whole inflationary cycle, this is pretty potent stuff. And apparently, the audience was a bit gobsmacked by the level of frankness that both these individuals showed in their discussions. And I guess the fundamental question is, who are these men to speak of government, speak of policies this way? And the fact is, I looked it up. If you bought into National Bank 5 years ago, it was trading at about 62, and I think it closed today at 92. So I guess they do have some indication of what it is that they're talking about. But yeah, this one kind of came out of left field, which is why I mentioned it.
You think this will come up in the National Assembly?
Hey, listen, the way everyone is so crazy up there right now, even today alone, the thin skins, and Legault is suddenly realizing that maybe the opposition is waking up. Maybe all this is being spurred, of course, because of the by-election, the increasingly important symbolic by-election in Jean-Talon in Quebec City. But Quebec Solidaire was calling for the resignation of Benoit Charette, the environment minister, today, because they claim he deliberately omitted to mention that the air quality, Limoilou, which is an area of Quebec City, was not safe. It had exceeded government norms for nickel for 2 months, but he didn't point that out. And once again, Marois Risky, who had a game to the French press, have to say, no, I'm not going to run as leader of the Liberal Party. She also called for an emergency meeting with Bernard Drinville on the grounds that essentially the school system, the academic system in Quebec, is falling apart, and he has done nothing. So some people are piping up. Things seem to be stoked up. So maybe they're a bit distracted now. But any other time for I think, a bank president to turn around and publicly question government policy, which is his right. And to be fair, they went after the province and the feds. But all that said, it's kind of interesting. Perhaps it shows that the private sector is not as aloof as we would think to what's going on all around us. There's an economic crisis. I think the banks will pay attention because they've got some skin in the game. But it was, as I say, it was just very interesting to see.
By the way, I should mention Marwa is going to join us at around 5:20 this afternoon to talk about what you just brought up, Jim, this whole idea of what's not happening in schools. And as they say, not coincidentally, right?
Depending on the riding, yeah.
Well, depending on, the whole funding for schools, although frankly, that's a tradition as old as the sea itself, right? Vote de Bombard, you'll get the government largesse, they'll build the highway or build the school. But what I find interesting is, and it's always a delight to hear from Mauro Rizki, I think at some point, Bernard Drinville better come on the show and explain what it is he does for a living.
Oh, we're trying.
Well, we've been trying for a while now. Yeah.
I maintain. He got a little big for his breeches, if you will, very early in his career, and I feel like François Legault deliberately put him on this portfolio to bring him down a peg or two.
Yep.
And I think
instead
of being a peg or two, it's like 12.
I think that was the assessment that I gave on the show, because basically he is known, and which is not a bad thing, but he's known as being a very ambitious politician. Mm-hmm. But all that said, and listen, as far as I can tell, and we also discussed this, he doesn't seem to have that much flight time as an education minister. Not that you necessarily need it, but clearly he usually seems to be like 12 hours behind on what he should know about in terms of his own ministry. So who knows? But once again, I don't think you're going to see any major changes, at least in the short term, until after October 2nd, until we see what's going to happen in Jean-Talon, because clearly the CAQ are concerned, to say the least, about what's going to happen in there. And once again, it's not going to make any difference to how they can govern with their 90 or their 89 seats right now. Maybe go back up to 90. But if they lose, it's going to be, in this instance, a very important symbolic defeat. And whereas I don't usually give much currency to symbolic gestures, in this particular instance, when François Legault is making his way through his political life, essentially portraying himself as the voice and face of Quebec. Well, if, deep in the heart of Texas and Quebec City, I don't think you can get, more Quebec than that. If they turn around and give his party the toss, that's going to smart. That's going to sting, and the opposition will make sure that it stings for a while.
I'm thinking about the fact that, we've often said Jean-François Roberge was a disaster as the education minister, but at the very least, he did grant us he wasn't exactly accessible, but he granted us a few interviews. Yeah. Bernard Drinville has been completely MIA.
Well, I mean, this seems to be a trademark of this government, right? You still haven't had Legault on the show.
No.
Yeah. Unless it's Eric Girard. He's made himself available on a couple of occasions.
Yeah, well, he's the
Jean Boulet.
Yeah, Jean Boulet is pretty much it.
He's the whatever it is designated for patting Anglos on the head, so yeah.
All right, let me move on from that. I kind of agree with you on this next topic. So we had the big five grocery executives being brought into Ottawa to kind of make the case. We had a big housing announcement made, and of course, we've talked about the fact that Quebec's like, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. We're not going to follow the federal lead on this. But this whole housing legislation, from what we are hearing, have there been any details in this, really?
Well, what came out, and the reason I mentioned it again, because you're right, we had discussed it, but you know how it is. When we get stuff and we kind of figure, we look at what's being reported and we figure that's it. But you're always wondering, well, did I miss something? We were talking about Trudeau's announcement he's going to take the GST off of construction material for the construction of rental properties. And I thought, I mentioned on the show, well, he doesn't seem to have mentioned what kind of properties. I mean, are we talking about affordable housing here? And apparently, after having a meeting with the Canadian Business Council, this government and our dear industry minister, François-Philippe Champagne, they came out, there is no condition to this. So, and of course, Pierre Poilievre has said, oh, it's really great. So if you want to build like a $10 million penthouse apartment for some billionaire, you won't have to pay GST. And at least in Ontario and Newfoundland and BC, you're not going to be paying sales tax on any of your construction materials as well, which really kind of confirms my suspicion that since the beginning of the week, Trudeau's been trying to pull all these rabbits out of his hat. And this is one of them. It's like, oh, look, we're dealing with the issue of the housing crisis. And the rationale for not putting any conditions on is essentially, well, if you increase the supply of rental properties, clearly the price will go down because that's what you learned in Economics 101. The problem being, of course, that is not at all what happens. You simply are free to, if you build in a particular area, if you're shooting for a particular clientele, you'll get away with getting, being able to collect the high rent. But on the other hand, the people who are still waiting to get a roof over their head are still waiting to get a roof over their head. And this so-called, this grandly named, loi sur le logement, the act for housing and affordable groceries. You don't see that in, naming a law very often. But it's just smoke and mirrors.
I don't know. I mean, I know we talked about the fact that at the time, Jim, the feds had to do something. This seemed like a much bigger deal. They announced those 2,000 houses, right, going up in London, and then it seemed to kind of fade after that. So I guess we'll have to wait for the devil, as they say, being in the details on this one.
Well, the money's out there, but it's just a matter of spending it. And I think
to
a certain extent, there are so many distractions for the Trudeau government above and beyond the ones that we hear about every day. You're quite right. Maybe the whole thing is just, or maybe they're just hoping it's just going to dribble off the radar.
Hey, by the way, we didn't get to talk about this and we're out of time, but just real quickly, this is going to be the biggest potential public sector strike we have seen in this province in a while. Am I right in saying that?
420,000 employees. Thus far, the voting is going on until the middle of October, but thus far, the Canadian Press reported this morning that the return that they're getting for the elections that have been happening so far in the education, higher education, and healthcare sectors it's more than 90% approval. And in fact, I got an email from John Abbott College or the union of John Abbott College, proudly proclaiming, I think they went by like 99 point whatever in favor of strike action. So this is for real stuff.
Get ready.
And this is something else that Francois Legault is going to have on his plate on top of whatever happens on October 2nd. But it's also going to be something that I think next week we're going to hear more and more about how the big bad unions are going to be holding Quebec by the throat. I think that's going to be next week's theme for the CAQ government.
James MENNIE, the Montreal Gazette. Jim, thank you. Have a great weekend.
You too, guys.
Stay out of downtown.